Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 7-Minute Math. As you can clearly tell by the title, this isn't going to be math, so it's actually not going to be usual for the channel. But I guess you can call me 7-Minute Math in one history video, because today we're going to be recapping Units 1 and 2 of AP World History. So, yeah, it's for those of you who are in my AP World History class and are about to be doing the benchmark tomorrow, which super scary, but let's just get straight into it with the first topic, the Byzantine Empire. Prior to the fall of the Roman Empire in 485 AD, the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire had been slowly drifting apart due to differences in their beliefs in Christianity, differences in language, and overall, the distance between the two halves of the empire had slowly caused them to drift apart. When the Roman Empire fell to invading foreign tribes in 485 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire, who still called themselves the Roman Empire, but historians today call them the Byzantine Empire, was the only remaining piece of the Roman Empire. The very first emperor of what we call the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Constantine I, built his city, Constantinople, on top of an old Greek city called Byzantium, which is where we get the name Byzantine from. And Constantinople was placed specifically so that they could be near their enemies, the Sassanid Persian Empire. Under Emperor Justinian I, the Byzantine Empire was eventually able to reclaim most of the land that had previously belonged to the Western Roman Empire, reconquering it from the foreign tribes that had destroyed the Roman Empire in the 5th century CE. Another fun fact about the Byzantine Empire that you should probably know, just in case, is that they spread Orthodox Christianity quite a lot, using missionaries. The conversion of Slavic peoples to Orthodox Christianity really caused it to spread. Then we have the fall of the Byzantine Empire. Every empire has to fall eventually. In the 6th century AD, they were hit by the plague of Justinian. And in the 14th century AD, they were hit by the Black Death, along with, obviously, the rest of Europe. This, plus increasing presence of Islamic empires, caliphates in the region, is what eventually led to the fall of Constantinople and the end of the Byzantine Empire. So yeah, that's about it for the Byzantine Empire. Let's get straight into topic number 2. Let's get into our second topic, which is Christianity and Islam. Christianity and Islam throughout history have been two of the most, if not the two most important religions in the world. Let's start with Christianity, the one I know more about. So, Christianity is a monotheistic Abrahamic religion, meaning it stemmed from Abraham, and they only believe in one God, monotheistic, which Islam also is one, but we'll get to that later. There are 3 main branches of Christianity: Orthodox, Protestant, and Catholic. Catholic was the original, the one that the Roman Empire strictly adhered to. Then the Byzantines, or the Eastern Roman Empire, was Orthodox Christian, and Protestant came about after Martin Luther had this whole protest about what the Catholic Church was doing in Europe. So Protestant protest makes sense. That's where they got that from. And the holy book of Christianity is the Bible. I feel like everybody knows that. And their place of worship is called the church. On to Islam. Islam is also a monotheistic Abrahamic religion, meaning they only believe in one God. Their God is called Allah, and it also stemmed from Abraham, just like Christianity did. And Islam is very different from Christianity. That's about where the similarities end. Islam came about in the Middle East area of the world and was able to quickly spread throughout Asia. It reached from as far as North Africa to Indonesia, so a very large area that was Islamic. Islam, their place of worship is a mosque, and their holy book is called the Quran. There are 5 pillars of Islam, so 5 pillars, 5 basic, like pillars of the religion. I can't find another word to say for it, which is number 1, faith. You must proclaim your faith in Allah and Prophet Muhammad. Number 2, prayer. You must pray 5 times a day facing Mecca, the holy city, which is in Saudi Arabia, present-day Saudi Arabia. Number 3, fasting. Every Ramadan, from sunrise to sunset, you must fast, meaning no eating or drinking. And number 4, alms. Alms means you must give charity, basically like synonymous with charity. Number 5, the Hajj. If you are financially able, every Muslim, at least once in their life, has to make a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city of Islam. So Mecca is not actually that big of a city in terms of population and size, except as it is the holy city of Islam, and so many Muslims go there every year for the Hajj. It is a very populated city at all times, while also not having a big permanent population. You get what I mean? Yeah. So that's about all you need to know for topic 2, Islam and Christianity. Let's get straight on to topic 3. Let's get straight into topic number 3, the Islamic Caliphates. The struggle is real on this topic, for real. So basically, after Muhammad died, Muslim empires were led by these religious caliphs. They were called caliphs, and there were many caliphates throughout the time period that followed after Muhammad's death and the spread of Islam. Many caliphates. The most famous of the caliphates were the Abbasid caliphates, but we're not going to be getting into that yet. The first caliphate is the Rashidun Caliphate. Now, if you're wondering, what does the word caliphate mean? It's similar to kingdom. You know how a king has his kingdom? A caliph has his caliphate. So, caliphate or caliphate, kingdom. Makes sense. So the first was the Rashidun Caliphate. Let's get straight into the Rashidun Caliphate. So, what they were known for mainly is their protection of dhimmis, which were the protected people, which are basically any other monotheistic person. So if you followed another monotheistic religion, such as Judaism or Christianity, you were a protected person. And you did have to pay a jizya tax, which was a tax that you had to pay as a non-Muslim in order to not have to convert. So yeah, you basically paid them to not have to be a Muslim. So that's one of the things that the Rashidun Caliphate was known for. They also rapidly expanded Islamic territory. They were able to grow and spread throughout a large portion of like the Middle East, which is the beginning of the rise of the rise of Islam, and it spread across Asia and North Africa. The Rashidun Caliphate was from 632 to 661 CE, so a very short-lived caliphate. So, the next caliphate after the Rashidun Caliphate was the Umayyad Caliphate. So, a lot of the original caliphs were poisoned or assassinated, which is what led to the end of the Rashidun Caliphate, which ushered in the Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyad Caliphate was known for continuing the jizya tax rule, but was not very popular amongst the people because of their preferential treatment of Arab Muslims over the others. But around this time, the Arab Muslims also became increasingly reliant on the Mamluk, a Turkic tribe, which ended up leading to the end of the Umayyad Caliphate. The Abbasid Caliphate, or Abbasid Caliphate, I prefer to say Abbasid Caliphate, which it kind of made me sad when I said Abbasid Caliphate earlier, because that sounds so, like, American. But Abbasid Caliphate, this was the prime caliphate. So, like, the best caliphate, the greatest caliphate, because they were not interested in territorial expansion as much as the previous caliphates were. They were only interested in building their culture, advancing their technology, and overall just being a goated caliphate. They were the ones with the House of Wisdom, They were the ones who restored ancient Greek and Roman texts and literature. They were able to save ancient artifacts. They were the most advanced empire at the time. The Abbasid Caliphate was just amazing. I am not glazing the Abbasid Caliphate. I just love it. And this is something I couldn't even remember. Their capital city is Baghdad, not Damascus. I put Damascus and got it wrong. So don't put Damascus for the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. That is Baghdad. But yeah, absolutely amazing, luscious caliphate there. Abbasid Caliphate, best caliphate, hands down. Except in the late 9th century, the Abbasid Caliphate fell because of increasing tensions between the Sunni and Shia Muslims. So, yeah, it didn't last. But when it did last, it was the greatest caliphate. But, yeah. They still kind of had a sort of nominal rule. The caliphate was still a thing, except he just didn't have any real power. And the Abbasid was really like the last we saw of caliphates. Which brings us into topic 4, Vikings, Mongols, and trade routes. I actually know a lot about this myself. So, Norse Vikings. Basically, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Greenland, areas like that. Vikings. Starting in the 10th century, which is the 900s, Vikings spread through sea routes across the British Isles, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Greenland, that kind of area, Faroe Islands, all of that area, which is actually what led to our language, English, borrowing a lot of words from Old Norse languages because of Viking expansion. And actually, Christopher Columbus was not the first European to discover the Americas. It was actually the Vikings who landed in Canada centuries before Christopher Columbus was even born. They were actually able to spread through sea routes pretty far. They made it all the way around Europe, all the way into the Arctic Sea through Greenland. They made it to North America, and they were even able to establish settlements, which became cities, in as far as Russia. So, yeah, pretty big expansion coming from the Vikings there. Next, we get into the Mongol Empire, an empire I know well because I had to do an entire DBQ on it. In the year 1206 CE or AD, Genghis Khan united all of the nomadic Mongolian tribes into one empire. He was the Khan. Khan is not his real name, it's his title. He was the Khan of the Mongolian Empire. The Mongol Empire had some brutal tactics to quickly take over cities and empires, spread across land very quickly. They used horses and crossbows and swords combined in combat. They invented stirrups to control the horse using their feet as they shot and swung from the horses. Obviously, the enemies in these fights were defenseless as they could not do the same with their horses. Did they even have horses? Nobody knows. So how were they going to win the fight? You would just have a Mongol just charging at you on his horse at like 25 miles an hour. Giant sword swinging towards your face. What are you going to do? So that's how they were easily able to win every fight they got into, spread insanely fast, and end up taking over at their height almost all of Asia, which, if you don't know, is the biggest continent on Earth. So that is a feat. The Mongol Empire were just absolutely wild. That's all you can really say about them. They were described as wild beasts by the Russians. So, I mean, if that doesn't tell you anything, I don't know what does. Trade. The Vikings mainly relied on naval trade, or nautical trade, if you will. Trade using the ocean, which makes sense because they mostly did ocean exploration and routes. and expansion through the ocean. That's why they have a lot of islands, or had a lot of islands as their territory. They used mostly the sea for their trade, whereas the Mongol Empire used the Silk Road, which, if you don't know, the Silk Road was like the most important and most famous today of the trade routes from this time period. The Silk Road stretched from Constantinople in the west, which was part of the reason why the Byzantine Empire fell. Constantinople was a choke point on the Silk Road. The one who controlled Constantinople controlled the Silk Road. The Silk Road went from Constantinople in the west all the way to China in the east. And when the Mongols had control of almost all of it, they obviously messed up some stuff with trade. If you don't know, the Mongols used paper money, which they had gotten from the Song dynasty, and they used this to absolutely destroy trade in the area. So yeah, Mongols, no good for trade. That's about it for the Vikings, the Mongols, and trade. So let's move on to the next topic. The Dark Ages. The Dark Ages were not a little dark age, as the goated song might suggest. They actually lasted an entire millennium, from the 500s all the way up until the 1500s AD/CE. By the way, it was only a dark age for Europe. Asia, with its caliphates and Chinese dynasties, was flourishing, thriving in this era, but Europe was hit hard by the plague. The plague, everybody has heard of the bubonic plague. Basically, that was the most common, but there were 3 types of the plague. Each one did horrible things to you, had, obviously, at the time, with the primitive medicine, almost 0% survival rate. So if you got the plague, you were dead. The plague killed a lot of people in Europe in the 1200s and 1300s and 1400s, somewhere around that range, towards the end of the Dark Age in Europe. That's when that really happened. Germanic Europe. France was known as Gaul at the time, and this is when the Germanic tribes started to come down from the area that we now call Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, that area, and into France and that sort of thing. Charlemagne, a Germanic king of Gaul or France, he basically asked the Pope if he could become the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And the Pope was like, yeah, that's so cool. Be my Holy Roman Emperor. So then they made the Holy Roman Empire, which, why? And yeah, he just did stuff for Christianity. He encouraged education among the clergy, which is like the church officials. You know, you want them to be like smart because they're like in control of a lot of stuff at the time. And he split France into 3 kingdoms, which ushered in the era of feudalism. Feudalism is basically an economic and political society in which there are manors owned by lords, protected by knights, and served by peasants or serfs. The land was called a fief, and the house was called a manor. And serfs were the peasants. They were at the bottom of the social hierarchy. They took care of the land. They took care of the house. They took care of everything for the Lord. They were the Lord's servants. They could not be sold or bought, so that's the only difference between serfs and slaves. But serfs still had a horrible life, just working for the Lord all day, every day. Next, a step up is the knights. They protected the fief, and they protected the Lord, and they would get into fights with other lords and other fiefs to take over more land. And above them were the lords. The lords were the owners of the manors and of the fiefs, and they were basically in control of everything. They could say, knights, go attack this other lord and his fief. I want this land. And they would do it because the Lord is in charge. Above the Lord, though, is the king. The king was in control of everything. He was the king of the entire empire or of the nation. And he didn't really have much control over the actual feudalism society and manners and fiefs and stuff, but he was, still in charge, nominally, again. And last but not least, the church. The church was above all at the time in Europe. The church was above the king. The church was above everyone else. And that's actually it for the Dark Ages and feudalism. So amazing. That's beautiful. Because I'm tired. And I also need to do this test tomorrow. So let's get straight into the next topic. Post-classical China is something we need to touch on. So, firstly, we need to talk about the dynastic cycle. In Chinese culture, you would get a mandate of heaven. It wasn't actual heaven, the same as Christianity, because obviously they weren't the same thing. It was basically heaven is our Christian equivalent of what was in the Chinese culture. The mandate of heaven was given to a family, and they became the leaders, and it was their dynasty. But if they sucked as a leader, they could lose their mandate and basically be kicked out and replaced with a new dynasty, a new family who had a new mandate of heaven. So that's the dynastic cycle. And it happened quite a lot. So let's talk about the first dynasty, the Sui dynasty. It's not actually the Sui dynasty. It's like the Sui dynasty, I think. I think it's something like Sui, but I say Sui. Sui. So the Sui dynasty, or the Sui dynasty, how you actually say it, from 581, so 581 to 618 AD or CE, depending on who say it, they were like one of the first dynasties. They were a very short-lived dynasty, and they united all of the people, the Han peoples in China, under a single centralized administration. They were the first to start developing a merit system for their government officials, and they also were the first to start working on the Great Canal, very important in the future for trade and for the Chinese economy. So Sui dynasty, short-lived dynasty, but planted the seeds of what was to come in future dynasties. The next dynasty is the Tang dynasty. From 618 to 907 CE, it is considered prime Chinese dynasties, just like the Abbasid caliphates were for Islamic empires. This was considered the prime. The Tang dynasty continued development of this merit system that the Sui dynasty had brought, while also downsizing the government. Very good things they did there. Which was able to, by making the government smaller, it was able to make sure that only the best people in the entire land could be in charge. Smart. With champa rice, which is a new rice for them discovered in Vietnam, which was able to withstand a drought. It was able to help keep people fed even in arid climates like the Gobi Desert, and was part of the reason why their population skyrocketed. And they actually exceeded the maximum territorial extent of the Han dynasty, which was like the bar, the precedent for Chinese dynasties and their power. And the Tang dynasty ended up being the biggest. Last but not least, the Song dynasty. The Song dynasty made great improvements in invention, specifically inventing for instance, they invented the paper money for the first time, which now everybody uses paper money, so very influential. They also had the first standing navy and created the Maritime Trade Supervisorate, which controlled and placed taxes on imports. Placed imports on taxes is wild. Placed taxes on imports. The Song dynasty created the compass facing true north and gunpowder. They also created the tributary system, where you would send tributes from your nation to the Sui dynasty, or to the Song dynasty, to China, and basically just give them praise, and in exchange, you would get stuff. So, tributary system, you know? Very good. For their ego, at least. So, that is the Song Dynasty is the last one that's touched on before the Yuan Dynasty, which was actually a Mongol-led dynasty. So that connects back to the Mongol Empire. And that was the Yuan Dynasty. They apparently smelled really bad, according to a Chinese chronicler writing about them. So by 1279, the Song Dynasty was gone. It was the Yuan Dynasty. They continued the Yuan Dynasty continued what the Song Dynasty had started, with the paper money specifically, and with the advancements in trade. So yeah, that was studying for the AP benchmark with me. I got tired there at the end, started making some mistakes, but I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one, you know what I mean? I hope there isn't a next one. So yeah, bye everybody, whoever's watching. Good luck on your AP benchmark.